Good afternoon. How is everyone? And welcome to this week's Building Power. I am your host, Sister Zakiya Sankara Jabbar. Really excited to be here again today. Today I'm welcoming my brother and friend, Rashad. And let me just tell you a little bit more about him before we hop right in. Rashad Turner is the founder and president of the Minnesota Parent Union. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization that partners with parents and students to help ensure that more children are receiving a high quality education. Rashad earned his bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Hamlin in 2008 and his master's in education from the University of St. Mary's at University of Minnesota. Rashad was also the founder of BLM St. Paul in 2016, but is no longer affiliated with the BLM organization because they have been hijacked by the teachers union, just like the NAACP. Wow. That is a very powerful and interesting bio, Rashad. Let us know, man, what's going on? How's it going? Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Glad to be here with you, sister. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this. I know that's a bold statement, but it's the truth. You know what I mean? It's the truth. It ain't just my opinion. You could look around and hear these unions talking about Black Lives Matter. But what about the Black lives inside of those classrooms, right? So, we got a lot of time to talk, but yeah.
We got a lot of time to talk, and I wanted to start with so shout out to you for founding the Minnesota Parent Union. Parents certainly need an advocacy organization to represent their and their children's best interests when it comes to education, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about what was the inspiration for you founding this organization? I mean, you guys are doing some pretty powerful work. I've been watching for the last several months, and I'm really impressed. Can you tell us a little bit more about, why you decided to start a parent union? Like, what was that thing that just made you be like, you know what, we need a parent union. We got to do something about what's going on here. Tell us about that.
So I would say a few different things, and I'll go back to my childhood. Right. And I think about the advocacy that my grandmother, did on my behalf and my brother's behalf. I think about the fierce warrior she was walking into that school, letting them know that she expected the best from them. And she also expected the best from her grandchildren. So for me, that's my beginning, where advocacy begins for me. But I think also if you look at the research, it'll say that if our children have at least one advocate, our outcomes are better, life outcomes are better. So when we think about Minnesota Parent Union, a big part of that is having parents' backs. There's a big gap in Minnesota, and I know across the country and other states as well, but there's a huge gap as far as parents of color, indigenous parents impacted by our state's worst in nation education gaps, being able to be at the table, and not just at the table, but actually creating solutions, influencing the solutions, being at those decision-making tables that are impacting the lives of our children, which, a lot of us know that hasn't been the case. Our schools have been, in my opinion, completely controlled by teachers' unions who have a legal fiduciary responsibility to teachers. So there's no way that teachers unions could prioritize or put the needs of our children first. And we know we needed to change that. We need to change that. Otherwise, as one of my late mentors would say, rest in peace, Mr. Millsap. But he would always say, if we don't change what's happening in education with our babies, our people are in trouble. Right?
Wow.
We don't want to get to that point. So we're here to kick down that door and make sure more children are in good schools, make sure that parents have a voice at every decision-making table in education, and also knock that teachers union down a few notches. We have to level the playing field out. I say at least a couple of times a week, if we don't check the teachers unions, none of the work we're doing will matter, because that's a beast that doesn't sleep. they're a 24/7 beast that is trying to do everything they can to kill our children's hopes and dreams on behalf of teachers. Um, and just to be clear with folks, right? This, my frustration or disdain even with the teachers union is not about individual teachers. I talk to a lot of teachers every week, Zakiya, and most of them are clueless when it comes to the political agenda
Right.
of the union. That they're paying those dues, and because they are hardworking, effective teachers focusing on their classroom, a lot of the stuff that the teachers unions do,
The rank and file teachers.
yeah,
Right.
the rank and file, right?
I
And
appreciate you making that distinction, brother, because I have been a part of a public union. It wasn't a teachers union, but I was a part of a public union when I worked for the state government in Ohio. And certainly a lot of these unions have certainly, I would say, have drifted a lot from, what they are supposed to stand for, where they're supposed to be standing for workers' rights. And in and of itself, that can be admirable. But I love how you put it when you said that the teachers unions have a legal and fiduciary responsibility to represent the best interests of the teachers. And I think that's accurate, and I love how you put that, because a lot of times there's people in the education field, in education justice work, who don't agree with your view and similar to my view when it comes to teachers union, because they just think, well, we should just automatically align with teachers union. And I think, and I asked him, I said, well, do you also automatically align with the police union? I said, because that's the same thing. They defend a lot of times bad behavior, but it seems like people have finally come around on the police union, and this, like, now you see activists calling for the police union to be kicked out of the AFL-CIO and all of that. There, if you saw last summer, there was huge protest even in front of the AFL-CIO. It didn't get a lot of media coverage, but I thought that was a powerful demonstration of the crack, right, between the so-called left being always pro-union, even when the unions themselves are detrimental to the communities that are fighting for justice. Right. And I don't think that we have got there yet on a national scale with teachers unions, which is why I think your work is extremely effective in Minnesota, and could eventually lead to more of a national movement of Black parents and other parents of color saying, hey, I like what's happening with that parent union in Minnesota. They've done this or they've done that. So do you believe that your work could eventually be a national model for other parents who are looking to organize some power to push back on the detrimental policies sometimes that we see that teachers unions push for in the interest of teachers, when it's not always in the best interest of children and families?
So first of all, let me say thank you, and I'll say we have a very sharp team here, right? So part of it is the model, right, of that authentic engagement, following the lead of parents, partnering with parents,
right?
But another big part of it is my team, right? We got a super awesome team, multilingual folks from the community in the space. So I would say, absolutely, it could be a model that other states could pick up on, or that we could evolve into a national thing. And I say that because if you think about efforts, and I can talk about Minnesota specifically, but a lot of efforts here in Minnesota to close our opportunity gaps, eliminate our worst in nation education gaps, have not.
You said worse than the nation. Wow.
Worst in nation. Yep. Everybody thinks of Minnesota, Minnesota nice, what we call it up here, but we have worst in nation education gaps. We have a bunch of schools in the Twin Cities where 4 out of 5 kids can't read, right?
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable. And I think that I'm just seeing my guy pop up there. What's good with you? But I think that as far as our model, another big piece of it is, like, we don't play no games. We don't take no for an answer, right? So I know we have a different approach that makes some folks uncomfortable, right? But I would say that, the time has passed. There's never been a time to drag our feet, and now definitely ain't the time. So I think that what we see, thinking about the unions, right? I see the energy around, police unions. I'm hoping, or I'm waiting for that energy to pop up around teachers unions, right? Because we're talking
Amen.
about pretty much the same thing,
Yeah.
right? They do these same things, and it's just like, one of the pieces with all of the pushback on the police unions is I wonder how authentic that is, or is
Mm.
that something that teachers unions have been able to get their claws into to sort of send us in that direction, to focus on police unions and miss the bigger problem, right? Because I honestly feel that, education is the number one issue, right? There's no, you ain't getting no how. Well, I take that back because they got programs that they try to keep us stuck on where we can get housing and can't read. But if you think about economic justice, employment, all of that type of stuff, if you can't read, the chances are slim that you're even gonna be able to get a house, that you're gonna be able
That's
to,
fact. That's
right?
fact.
When I think about, our prisons, in Minneapolis, this is a statistic that many people don't know, and I don't even know really how to talk about this statistic. But when we think about criminal justice and think about
Right.
what our children are having to see their parents deal with, right? I think the stat is in Minneapolis, 1 out of 6 children in Minneapolis have one parent that's in jail or prison. 1 out of 6. And then if you look at prison statistics, and I might get this percentage wrong, but I think 70 to 80% of the folks who are in prison are reading at like a fourth or fifth grade level.
No, that's the truth. I remember hearing that.
All right. All right.
That's a correlation. And so one has to beg the question, who is responsible for young people, right, who graduate, right? And when we look at the graduation rates, particularly of Black students and Black males in particular, I can tell you from Ohio, it was around 56%, which I think is deplorable. Ohio is also, yeah, it's deplorable. Ohio is also a state that has strong teachers unions. It's a collective bargaining state. However, in some of our southern states, particularly in the Southeast, which has the highest number of Black folks in the country per capita, most Black people who live in the United States are pretty concentrated in the Southeast. So we're talking about Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. When I think about the rural education of Black students that's happening right now, their outcomes are similar, if not worse. But they also don't have like strong teachers unions. So my question, I guess, to you, brother, and I get you are in a teachers union state that they have like strong collective bargaining. But what responsibilities do the districts have, right, when it comes to resources, when it comes to making sure that there are other kinds of wraparound services and things like that? What responsibilities do you believe that the school district themselves have to make sure that children are learning and getting access to a high quality education from your perspective?
I mean, I think a lot of the responsibility is on school districts and individual schools, right? I mean, I think their main priority should be to make sure our children are learning how to read, right? And I want folks to be clear, like all of our children are capable of learning, right? And that's just the bottom line. So it's like that responsibility falls on schools and school districts. And I think that school districts have a responsibility to push back on the teachers unions, right? Or if it's mayoral control, like we're seeing in Chicago, like they have to push back on teachers unions. There are some school districts that, just get ran over by the teachers unions. And it's like, that responsibility is on their shoulders as well. Like a school district's primary responsibility should be our children, should be creating that environment that is welcoming, that is safe, that's loving. But to me, you can't have an environment that's welcoming, safe, and loving if children aren't learning how to read, right? That's not the type of love I want for my daughter. So I think they have a big responsibility. And I think what we're seeing in Chicago, with the mayor putting her foot down and saying, "Hey, we ain't gonna do that. We ain't going for that." I'm hoping more leaders take that approach because you mentioned those southern states, Zakiya, and it's just like Mississippi. There's more Black children learning in Mississippi than there are in Minnesota. right?
Damn, that's a powerful statement.
So it's
Wow.
just, and people say up here, oh, well, we need more money. Well, we spend more money than Mississippi per pupil funding,
You
and
do. That's a good point. That's a
it's good
I
learning.
you got me there.
You know? So I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot to it, but one of the things, uh, I'm looking forward to is just knocking them down, knocking them teachers unions down, and leveling that playing field. Because again, that they can't legally do what's best for our children. We have to do that as parents. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about teacher demographics because I'm familiar with Minnesota a little bit. My girl Marika, who I know, who actually introduced me to a lot of just the horrificness about how education happens in Minnesota. She says a lot of the same things that you said, so much so, I don't know if you remember, but she actually started her own African-centered charter school for Black children. I mean, any children could have come, but it was an African-centered charter school. The state of Minnesota, the Department of Education, went after them so bad that they eventually had to close their doors, right?
Right.
Because of the power of the teachers unions at the Department of Education. Tell us about the teacher demographic in Minnesota, because I think this is critically important to the outcomes of Black and Indigenous and Brown children in Minnesota. What are the teacher demographics in Minnesota? Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think that is a direct correlation into the outcomes of children of color?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say that there ain't many teachers of color. I think depending on the numbers that you look at, it's 4 to 6% across the state.
So you
Uh,
have upwards of 90% of the teachers are white,
yes, ma'am. Yes,
white
ma'am.
women.
Exactly. I was just about to say it's like 96% white people, 94 or 92% white women. All right.
Wow.
And I'm gonna say something that uh,
Lean into that. No, lean into it. Yeah.
there was a white woman, one of my friends, white woman who said, "Hey, there's no way we can have a bunch of white women teaching all of our students of color." She said, "Rashad, how's it going to work out for Rashad, little Rashad, to try to live like a white woman, to live with that privilege, to live that same mindset, right?" So I think it's something that we have to do better. But when I think about, well, how do we get more teachers of color? Well, we have to do some things with policies, right? There's a policy called LIFO that the teachers unions, they ride this thing hardcore, last in, first out. And if you think about, well, we had some new teachers come in. I mean, we've had teachers of color here in Minnesota who were selected as the teacher of the year.
I heard about that, and she got pushed to another district.
Yep, yep.
Because of that rule of seniority.
Yep, seniority rule, right? It ain't about who's the most effective. It's about who's been in there the longest. You know what I mean? So it's policies like that. I mean, we have something that is called the Teachers of Color Act. That is a bill that's getting worked on here in Minnesota, right? But what happens is that people are good at throwing out these buzzwords, saying the right things, but when you really dive into that Teachers of Color Act, it's like, hey, we can't be approaching this. We can't beat white supremacy with white supremacy tactics or thinking.
Come on.
And I think a lot of the policies, again, not including parents, not including our students, that they missed the mark, right? I mean, but again, even if I say, hey, well, at least they're trying with that Teachers of Color Act. Well, who is trying to block that, right? We have a tiered licensure program that some people like, some people don't, but it creates more opportunity for teachers of color who come from other states or even within the state of Minnesota.
I remember hearing about that. That's a way that they keep Black teachers out who come up from the South.
Yes.
And they don't have a reciprocity agreement, whereas other states have that reciprocity agreement. If you have, say, for instance, if you have a teacher's license in the state of Alabama, Minnesota won't accept that.
They'll make you start pretty much all the way over. And It's just like, who wants to do that? You know what I mean? Not many people want to do that, but it's another example of hoops that teachers of color, people of color, indigenous people have to jump through, right? There's also a part of that where, they want you to do this student teaching for free. So it's like start all the way over, you know, they talk all of this poverty stuff, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, you can work for free. What do you mean? So there's a bunch of barriers in there with the tiered licensure program. Going back to that, right? Tiered licensure. It creates these tiers where folks can get in where they fit in, and people still have to do the work. They still have to get those skills and those competencies to be in the classroom, but it's a pathway. Who has been trying to knock that thing down for the past 2 years? Education Minnesota, our state teachers union, right? So it's like, as these unions talk about Black Lives Matter, as they say Native Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, to me, it doesn't match their actions, right? They can tell us and say all of those cool, woke sounding things, right? That we have, organizations like Black Lives Matter have allowed them to co-opt. Organizations like the NAACP have allowed them to co-opt. And that's what we're now having to battle, right? We have 90
NAACP national or the NAACP in Minneapolis?
The national NAACP.
Got it. Okay.
I'm thinking of, Derek Johnson.
Okay.
He had a hearing a few years ago where he basically had Randy Weingarten in there as the white savior. And he sat on the stage and allowed that to happen. This is when they was calling for moratorium on charter schools. Wow. You know who attends charter schools, right? So it's just like,
because in Minnesota, let's talk about that, because I think you made an announcement recently about something like that. And so I know that is actually one way parents have tried to exempt or tried to exude some self-determination, was to create their own schools through chartering, right? To get out of the power that the teachers union have on the public school system. But tell us about some of the barriers that even the ethnic charter schools. So I know that Somali families have created charter schools. I talked about Marika's African Center charter school, and there's other ethnic based charter schools. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the politics with that in Minnesota and what you're up to these days regarding that?
Yeah. So the politics are this, right? Or some of the politics is that here in Minnesota, folks are fine with mediocrity, right? That they've been fine with that. So the political dynamics of charter schools and district schools is that you have district schools where 4 out of 5 kids can't read, and you have charter schools where 4 out of 5 kids can't read, right? So I think, as a state, we have to raise the bar, right? We have to raise our expectations. And, as an organization, Minnesota Parent Union, we're all about quality education. We don't care if it's a district school, charter school, or private school. We want kids to be getting that quality education, right? We have, I'm going to try to figure out how to say this, right? I ain't got to bite my tongue on here, but we have schools like we got a school up here called Sojourner Truth, right? Disrespectful that the school is even named after such a great person, because 4 out of 5 kids in the building can't read. But what Sojourner Truth has figured out how to do is they have all of your dance classes, your hip hop, your wraparound services. They got everything except for a quality education. But because our families get beat down so much in district schools, right? We're fine with, that welcoming, loving cultural environment. And that's where, as an organization, we push parents to get more information, right? Obviously, we all want our children to be safe. We want them to be loved, cared for, but we also all want our children to be able to read, right? So it's about, diving deeper into that data, getting past the fluff, getting past, the wokeness of the school, right? How woke can we be if we can't read, right? So I think there's, dynamics that go into it, but I want to say that, that self-determination piece, right? That's powerful, and the announcement that you were talking about, I was actually just talking about this yesterday too. There's about 500 to 600 children between a great number of families, who, these parents have said, hey, this distance learning stuff is garbage. It's been
Straight
garbage the whole
garbage.
time, right? And it's just sort of, there's been an awakening around, hey, well, we have the power as parents. We just have to recognize that power. So coming up in April, and I've worked in education, I've worked in schools, but I'm not no principal or nothing like that. But I got the connections, right? So I want to get folks connected. We're going to start this process of, community engagement and starting to learn how to build a school, right? And it's something
It's
that,
amazing.
thank you. It takes a while, right? It's not something that just happens overnight. But if we don't do it, who's going to do it, right? If
Exactly.
parents are saying, "Hey, this ain't enough," or "This isn't acceptable," well, it's like, well, what does that look like then? What should things look like? And it ain't about like waiting on these schools to get better, right? Schools will say every year, "All right, we're working on this," or they'll pop out the diversity, equity, inclusion, that type of crap, right? But it's about like, hey, if we can grab this thing by the horns and do for ourselves, along with the support of folks who want to see our children reading, who want to see our children be successful just like we do, well, that's what we got to do, right? And it ain't easy, but it's a must, right? For 20 something years here in Minnesota, every year there's been an article. It started off as like Minnesota's, education gaps are embarrassing, right? 10 years later, it was, oh, things are still bad. And now it's just like our education gaps are criminal. And it's just like no one's going to do anything about it if parents aren't pushing them. If we aren't taking this approach that some folks might call bold, we call it necessary, right? We can't continue to be duped by these systems that have continued to fail our children year after year, right? And I want parents to know that, when I say or we talk about bad schools, failing schools, it's about the adults in the building, right? It's not about our
That's
children.
right. That's exactly
Our
right.
children are sponges. They'll soak that stuff up if it's being done in a way that is effective, right? So it's like these parents who stepped up to say, hey, how do we start a school? I mean, that's parent power, right? Because again, like you said earlier, we know who the beast is, right? We're starting to learn more about that teachers union controlling our schools. We're starting to think more about the power we have as parents. And that's something new here in Minnesota, right? Criminal justice has always been like, that's on the news every day, right? I mean, they kill us, that's on the news. What's not on the news is when they're killing our children's brains in that classroom, right? So we have to be the ones to create that awareness. We have to be the ones to kick down that door and say, hey, enough is enough. You're going to do it our way or else, right?
You're right. That's right. And one of the things that I was very impressed that you all did this summer was a boycott campaign. I would love to hear more about how that's going because I
Yeah.
have to share that recently I just wrote an op-ed myself calling for parents to really call on us to reorganize our lives in a way where we can homeschool or join homeschool collaboratives. Because homeschooling, I think sometimes parents kind of freeze up because I was one of those parents. I was forced, my husband and I were forced to homeschool our 6-year-old, right? Because online learning, are you serious for a first grader? It's absolutely a joke.
Well,
I mean, she would stay around for about 10 minutes and say hi to her little friends and everything and jump around and dance and stuff. But that was it. She's like, okay, bye, and she'll close the laptop down. So we were like, that's what's been happening for some kids for all of the year. And then finally, and my husband agreed because our politics is self-determination in education anyway. We always hammer home closely relevant curriculum. And we also have always, for our son who is going to high school next year, we always supplemented his education, even though he's been in public school most of his entire life. So I actually talked about this in an op-ed that was recently published on Education Post. There's a couple of bills that's being introduced in legislatures across the country. The one in New Hampshire actually gives the parents the most power, where they can actually take the dollars that are for education dollars actually follows the child, even if you're homeschooling. And that to me, I think is powerful if parents had a network where you could use to hire a tutor, you could use to support a homeschooling collective where parents take turns. Like it just would give so much more freedom, I believe, even around work schedules, alternatives, to children just going to school 6 hours a day and sitting down and getting poured into. Like there's so many things that could open up with that, kind of setup, that I thought this is a really good opportunity, particularly since the teachers unions are fighting to stay online. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about how you guys came up with that boycott.
So the boycott of Minneapolis public schools is still on. We haven't called that off. We are, we've given the superintendent of Minneapolis public schools a deadline on some policies, some parent-initiated policies that we have. And so there'll be an update on that in the next couple of weeks, whether that update is, hey, the superintendent is going to encourage the board to implement these policies, or whether that update is to say, hey, the superintendent needs to find a new job. We'll have an update either way in a couple of weeks. But how we came to that decision was we were hearing from a bunch of parents that they didn't have the resources. They weren't able to hear from schools. They weren't able to get in touch or hear back from schools. They didn't have, the technology. And for us, it was the thing at the beginning of the pandemic where, our family advocates were saying, hey, let's wait and see, what they come up with. They've got this time to plan. Once we see what they come up with, then we can go from there. What they came up with was garbage. It still left parents out in the cold, without the support, without the resources to even give our children a chance to learn something during this time. And we couldn't go back to families and just like, all right, well, we asked them some questions and, tough luck, good luck to you. But what we did was finally we were able to get a meeting with the superintendent and presented some solutions around distance learning. The superintendent looked at myself, some of my other teammates, and some other community members like we were just crazy, right? Like, why would we want to help families with pods? So after that response is when we called for the boycott. And, there were different reactions in the community, I'll say, but this was a time where, faith leaders came out, parents came out, other communities.
That's amazing.
Right. And that was a beautiful thing. So we'll see what happens with Superintendent Ed Graff. What a big policy we're pushing for there, just to get this out there, is what we're calling priority enrollment. Right. In Minneapolis, schools where our people reside at, who look like us, those schools, there's a great chance 4 out of 5 kids can't read. Right. It might be worse than that, like 3% reading proficiency.
That's unacceptable. We can't have that.
So what we're trying to push for is to say, hey, families who reside in these zip codes, because zip codes shouldn't determine the quality of education. Right?
That's right.
Well, no, we share that belief. So we want families who reside in these zip codes to have priority enrollment into the best schools in the district. The district gets to pick what the best schools are.
Right.
What we consider the best schools is the schools that have the smallest internal gaps. Right. Sometimes we can look at data and we see a big number, 73% are proficient, 80% are proficient. But most of the time that's talking about, wealthy white kids or, some Asian American students, right? It's not talking about everybody. And when you break those numbers down, you start to see, well, if you're an indigenous student in this school, you might as well just call it a wrap. You ain't going to have a chance. Right?
Wow.
So that's something that we're pushing for, priority enrollment. There's some language services things in there. Our families who, are emergent language learners, pieces in there that we need adjusted so it can truly be an inclusive school environment and school district. So we'll have an update in a couple of weeks. Like I said, that update would be to say, hey, these policies are going to get implemented, or it'd be to say, hey, enough is enough, and we need a new school superintendent in Minneapolis public schools.
Well, I have to say, one of the things that I specifically call for in my op-ed is that the dollars, listen, if y'all want to keep the schools closed and online, that's fine. I'm not in the business of pushing anybody back into a building if afraid of COVID, or if you're immunocompromised, all of that. I get it. But what's unacceptable is to continue to force poor and working class families to do online that's not working for them. We need access to those education dollars to hire tutors, to even do different curriculum if we want to actually full on homeschool. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And we need those education dollars to actually follow the child, meaning that coming to the families as a direct resource. And that's exactly what the bill that's been introduced in New Hampshire does. It actually gives, I believe, up to $5,000 per year, even though we know per pupil expenditures in some states are sometimes $20,000. In Maryland is 13,000 approximately.
Yeah.
Right.
Up here, it's right around 14, 15,000.
And you getting $14,000 or $15,000 per child, and you have outcomes. Where else can you keep your job with those kind of outcomes in the American economic ecosystem? I'm trying to figure out where else you can keep your job with those kind of outcomes and still get paid and get raises.
You probably couldn't mess up 10 hamburgers at McDonald's and keep your job. Right. So ain't no way you could go 10 years without educating children and still have a job. And one of the things, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, I keep running.
One of the things with the what you're mentioning with the education savings accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to let folks know that we have a bill that's being jacketed that does that same thing. The money needs
in Minnesota.
Yep, it's
I'm
just
sure the teachers union. So what's your response when people say, because this I got a lot of pushback, oh, this is privatization. So wait a minute, is it about the children learning and making sure that families have what they need, or is this a jobs program for white women? Which one is it?
I would say the latter, right? I mean, it should be about our children, right? When folks talk that privatization and all of that, I just know that they're drinking that union Kool-Aid. Right? Because like we have funding partners, none of them tell me what to do, right? None of them. They have my back, they give that support, they answer my questions, but none of them have ever said, hey, we want to privatize things, right? We're about choice, and that's what this is about. So if a parent or family says, hey, we're going to homeschool, more power to them. If a family says, hey, we want to start up a school, more power to them. But that's what it's all about, is that parent power, parents being able to choose, right? I even think we have to evolve, move it from school choice to parent choice, right? Because it's really about the parents.
It's really about the parents and the families. Like it's a family decision, right?
Yeah. And it's like school choice, I'm gonna holler at my people, but it's like, I think we can evolve that. I think it's time to evolve that, because when I hear school choice, it's still locking us into a school.
There you go.
Parents have way more choices than just a traditional school building, right? I mean, if we think about this.
Really quickly, what's your response when people say, well, public education is about the public good, right? I mean, because these are all the arguments, and I because I want to be fair here, with this conversation, privatization is not going to be good in the long run for poor and working class people, right? And for families who are poor and working class. What would be your response to that?
I would say nothing about our efforts are about privatization, right? Parent choice in itself is not privatization, right?
Okay.
Charter schools are public schools. And I think it's one of those things where it really shows those people's true colors, right? This is about power.
It's about power. That's real.
Here you go, right? Building power. And
that's what we're talking about, right?
That's what we're talking about, right? And it's like, for some people, other folks having power in their minds means that they lose power.
Right.
And it's just like, even if they do lose some power, so what?
Right.
But this is about power, and we have to understand that, there's nothing that's going to be conceded without a demand, right? But we even have to take it beyond that to just say like, hey, nothing's going to be conceded until we say we're not accepting no as an answer. And until we make sure we get the information, to where we can be knowledgeable. Because here's another thing I want to point out, right? At Minnesota Parent Union, that the work we do, sometimes it goes a little bit slower because we ain't
Yeah.
pouring that Kool-Aid, right?
Right.
We really
Right.
need to get folks informed. Because like my grandma would always say, like, if you knew better, you do better.
That's right.
And that's true, right? So it's just like there's a ton of stuff in this fight for education justice, and we just have to get in where we fit in, right? One
Right.
of the things that got me moving some years ago, right? And like I said, I've worked in education for like 10 years, right out of college, undergrad. Um, but there was a point in time, right about the time when I met Nakima Levy Armstrong, and at that time in my life, I felt like I needed to be doing more, right? I
Yeah.
had been working in the schools, trying to like, I was one of those people out of college, like, oh, I can change things from the inside, right? But it's like, as I kept, learning about the inside, and then I had this desire to like do more, a big
Hmm.
piece of that was getting informed, right?
Hmm.
Because they'll love to just have us as talking heads, right?
Right.
You can talk that stuff, people love it. It gets the people going. But
Hmm.
we have to get that information and really have that knowledge. So, I mean, a part of what we're doing is, learning ourselves every day, but then sharing that knowledge, right?
Right.
Knowledge, power, and what we're seeing in Minnesota. Forgot where I was going at the beginning of this, but what we're seeing in Minnesota is a new energy around parents recognizing that power, right? We are seeing, even the status quo is recognizing, right? They are
That's
doing
amazing.
to, strengthen their power because they know parents aren't just knocking on the door no more. We're kicking that door down, right? We're at the hearings at the Capitol. We're at the school board meetings. Our organization, we have these parent-led committees, right? We just had a great special education committee last night, and I'll tell you, there's always information gaps around what our power, what our rights are as parents. But last night on that Zoom, folks was learning, right? That energy was there, the energy to change what is happening in our schools, right? That energy to reclaim our schools is strong. And it's just like, some folks will try to come with these narratives or whatever. But I'll tell you, like, only you and I know those narratives, right? Only folks that are in this ecosystem dealing with
Right.
that. You ask a parent about privatization,
They
they're
looking
not
at you like,
gonna-
what that mean? Right.
yeah,
What are you
what
talking
does
about?
that have to do with the
Right.
fact that my baby girl can't read,
Right.
right? So I look at those narratives out there as distractions. And another thing I'll say is this, right?
Yeah.
You could ask folks who've been in the game, longer than us, right? Somebody 20 years ago. So you ask them, well, what were the narratives from the teachers unions at that time? Ain't nothing
Mm.
changed, right? They were saying the same thing 20 years ago that they were saying 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and to this day. And those
Hmm.
narratives are getting played out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would agree. I'd agree. So one of the things that I've been thinking about too, with this conversation as we continue to have it, is that I don't believe that schools will actually ever be the same. Since we're in COVID, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I think that, we're moving towards more of a hybrid model where there's going to be a lot more ed tech, um, and a lot more. Kind of online or digitized education. What are your thoughts on that? And have you and your parents have like some kind of discussions about that? Like how are parents in your group feeling about more digitized education? Do you think they prefer more, I don't know, talking to an AI, artificial intelligence, or artificial intelligence teaching or would they prefer like a real person? And not talking about like the current setup, but a real person talking to and teaching their children. Just seeing if you guys have had any kind of thoughts about that.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is that our schools can't go back to normal, right?
Right.
And we cannot allow schools to go back to normal.
I
Because
agree.
normal here in Minnesota means that, children can't read, right?
Right.
It means that, our children don't have people who look like them at the front of the classroom. They're only the behavior intervention or the hallway monitors, right? So we can't go back to normal. And I'll say, like, as far as parents, I think that the distance learning has just opened parents' minds, right? It's sort of, deepened our thoughts around what's possible with our children's learning experience and learning environment. So, I mean, there probably has been an increase in the number of families who want to do homeschooling.
Yeah.
Some of
A
our
lot. There's research that shows that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Some of our own team members have, said, "Hey,
Yeah.
we're on the homeschooling route." So I think
Right. Right.
again, to me, it comes down to that choice, right? But I think
Mhm.
that people's eyes are open to the different ways that it's possible for our children to learn. Because what we know is, like, hey, you look at the data and you even peel the onion back a little bit on that data, and it's like things aren't good. So it's like, here, this is what I was thinking of earlier, right? In Minnesota, uh, imagine that we spend 15,000 per pupil, right? We know that it hasn't been getting us the bang for our buck even before distance learning. But can you imagine that not one thing changed with the amount of money schools were receiving, but our babies are getting 1 hour of instruction? 1 hour. There's no way that equates to that per pupil funding formula. Like, it's not. So when I think about, like, our eyes have been open to what's possible, I know that we all as parents could do better with 15,000 in educating our children than what the schools are doing.
We definitely could.
You know, I mean, for this year, just thinking of my own daughter, she just turned 13, right? She loves school. She has always loved school. This year for her, she's tired of this shit. I mean, she ain't been, she knows, like, well, they're gonna give us the credit either way. So I'll do this shit, you know, after it's due, because I'm gonna get that. So the she realizes, like, expectations are super low.
They're so low. Yeah.
It just frustrates her, right? So one of the things we're thinking about is, like, hey, if we did have these education savings account, um, how much further along our daughter might be, right? I don't know that she needs to be in seventh grade based on, this system that we're in, right? So I think,
Mhm.
that there's opportunities out there. There's different ways of doing things. We cannot go back to normal, right? And
Right.
I would say, like, our daughter, she's in a quality school, right? She's in, like, top 5 middle school in the state. So I also want to make the point that, as parents, we have to move beyond our own children, right? I talk to
Exactly.
my daughter all the time, and she's like, well, we talk about different education issues, and she'll, like, oh, well, that test is easy, Dad. What do you mean? And I'm like, well, yeah, it might be easy for you because you have effective teachers and you have these resources at home. But, what about your classmates that you see struggling? And she's
Right.
a very caring individual, very intelligent, so she gets it. But I just wanted to say, like, we oftentimes, as human beings, we can get stuck with our own, right?
Right.
My daughter's doing great, so, everything's okay. We
Hmm.
have to push ourselves to go above and beyond our own, right?
Right. I completely agree. I've had a similar experience, with my son who's, he will be going, he is 13 and will be going to high school this year. And he'll be 14 in August. And I can just see, just the decline, similar to what you were saying with your daughter, is like the expectations, with online learning, and also just me having to really stay on top of him, like to
Yeah.
get the assignments in, because there's not rigor.
No,
There's
no.
so many things that's missing. And I'm also having opportunity to actually hear, like when he's online, I'm actually hearing,
Yeah.
which teachers are really effective, which teachers are really putting forth effort, and they're allowing themselves to be there to support. And I'm also hearing the teachers who are like, you know, just going with the flow kind of thing. And for some reason, sometimes that has nothing to do whether it's either online or in person. That's just what that particular teacher does. So it may not even be better even if it's in person. The point is, like you're making, is that parents have a right to make sure that their children have access to the best high quality education possible, and having different avenues to get there even with dollars, education dollars following the child, even in a homeschool setting, I see could be absolutely revolutionizing education. I don't think it has to be about privatization, because I will answer my own question, and I will say, you know, how has education in the last several decades, I would say since the Brown decision, we have literally almost 6 decades of data we can go back and look at and say, hey, this is not necessarily working out that great for Black students.
Right.
Right. We really need to do something different, and something that where we as parents and families and even the wider community have a lot more autonomy and control over what the children learn.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, it's been so jacked up, and I got this fan blowing on me, or I might be getting a little bit emotional, right? Because I think about, you know, when I think about my daughter, I think about all of the other parents that are experiencing that same thing, right?
Exactly.
And for some reason, for a second there, you know, it'll make you feel like you're failing as a parent. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like
So
that's what
true.
it do to you, you know? And we got all of the resources and connections we could need to, address those things, but it still beats you down as a parent, right?
Right.
And it's one of those things that, you know, when I talk to our daughter about school, um, it gets me sad because it's like, again, she's got two parents, right?
Right.
She's got, two parents with degrees and credentials and jobs and all of that stuff that gives her access and opportunities, but she still feels the way she's feeling through
Right.
experience.
Yep.
You know?
I think about that too. Yeah, even in a situation with my son, is like, here we are as parents, we have all this if so-called privilege, and so far that we have resources to help to scaffold the education and everything, but it's still difficult. And I think just in being in the COVID-19 environment is going to present that. It's a global pandemic, and there's
Yeah,
lots of other stressors that's happening literally for everybody, including teachers and everything like that. So we're winding up our time together here, and I know you have a lot of work to get to. And I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I'm really, again, excited about the work of the Minnesota Parent Union. I'm glad that you all have the resources that you need to be able to organize and support parents, particularly the parents of color.
yeah,
And I will be excited to continue to follow them, to see how this new school that you guys are starting evolves. I think that is amazing. Do you know if you guys are actually going to start like with elementary, or you're going to start all the way through? Is it going to be like a K-6, K-8, K-12? I don't know if you guys have gotten that far in the planning process.
I love when I get those types of questions because I love to give this answer right here.
Here
Right,
you go.
parent power is about parents making those decisions,
I
creating
love it.
those solutions, influencing those decisions. So we don't know none of that.
Okay.
Right? But we're gonna figure it out together as parents, as community members, as families, and make sure that we're not recreating this garbage system that we've all been a part of. You know
I
what I mean?
love that.
So
Amen.
parents will make those decisions. Um, but like I said, I love when I get that question because I get to say that. So,
Yeah. No, that's real. I mean, that lets you know that the work is really authentic and that you're really genuinely listening to the constituency that you guys are partnering with and organizing with. I want to allow you an opportunity just to share a last word before we wrap up, and
yeah.
share anything that you want the audience to know about. Also, tell people how they can support the work.
Absolutely, and I'll toss some stuff into the comments. Even when I do my own show, Dark Side of Education, I always forget to look at these comments, and the comments are popping in here.
Well, they're amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad folks is tuning in. Um, I guess one of the things I'll close with two things, right? I
Mhm.
think that in this work, it can get rough, right? It can get bumpy, it can get scary, um, but it's work that must be done.
That's right.
It's just like if we as parents don't continue to push the envelope to make sure our babies have what they need, um, that this system will continue to just clobber us. These teachers unions will continue to clobber us.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that we can, create some more awareness around the teachers unions, so we can actually give our children a chance. The other thing I would say is that, and this is for all of us, we've been dealing with this COVID. We've still been trying to stay focused, uh,
Yeah.
make sure we take care of our own mental health, right?
Yes. That's huge.
One of the things I'll say is that, my grandparents, I've been worried about them. Um, and it's like sometimes I'll just try to like plow through that stuff like nothing's going on, right? But I've had
Mm-hmm.
to recently remind myself that we have to take care of ourselves. And I ain't just talking that status quo self care stuff, but actually deep diving, talking things through, thinking about how we're feeling, and again, going above and beyond, thinking beyond ourselves, right? Get ourselves right, make sure we're in a good space, and then make sure the people around us are doing okay too. So, Zakiya,
Mm-hmm.
I hope you and your family are doing well.
I
Much love to
appreciate
y'all.
that.
I appreciate you having me on here. It's truly an honor. You know what I mean? I ain't even gonna lie to you. Uh, Glad to be here. Glad to be able to follow you, your leadership, uh, and just look forward to continuing to do that. So
That's right. Yeah, we definitely gonna continue to stay in touch. I'm definitely gonna continue to root you guys on, from afar. And anytime I can do anything to help support you guys in any way, I'm certainly a resource. And if I have it, in me, I'm there to do it. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Rashad, for the amazing work that you're leading with the Minnesota Parent Union. And with that, we can close out this week. And I will see you all next week. Thank you all so